Tonight, debate raging over the secrecy of the Children's Court. Overcharged and underprotected, calls for tough new laws to defend Australians from price gouging. A royal reunion. Prince Harry visits his father after the King's cancer diagnosis. And Swifties, beware. Police warn of ticketing scams ahead of the pop star's Australian tour. Good evening, Jessica Van Vonderen with ABC News. The government is considering options to allow media to have better access to children's court matters. It comes as reporters were refused entry into the courtroom where a 16-year-old boy stood accused of murdering a 70-year-old Ipswich woman over the weekend.
A teenage boy behind bars and details about his alleged crime heard behind closed doors. The case of the 16-year-old boy accused of killing grandmother Vilene White was heard for the first time in the Ipswich Children's Court yesterday, but despite attempts, media weren't allowed in.
We need open and transparent reporting, and we need this to happen so the media can report what is happening, so the facts are not hidden, the community know.
Now the entire youth legal process is under the spotlight. The Premier will meet with the Attorney-General to discuss potential reforms.
My opinion is that where reporters can be in those courts, I think magistrates should let them. And I'd certainly look for ways to encourage magistrates to consider making the courts more open.
Under current Queensland legislation, when a child is charged with a criminal offence, their cases are automatically held in a closed court. However, media outlets can apply to be in the proceedings. But the onus is then placed on us to be able to convince a magistrate that our presence won't be prejudicial to the child's interests. It's an argument that's often lost. If the offence is serious enough to progress to a higher court, the case will eventually be public, but that can take some time.
What we need, on balance, is more facts and less rumours about these cases so the community knows what's going on and can have confidence not only in our criminal justice system but in our justice system more broadly.
But the opposition has criticised the move, saying it was Labor who closed the Children's Court. In 2014, the LNP introduced laws to allow access to cases for repeat offenders. 2 years later, the measure was scrapped by the Palaszczuk government after concerns from academic and legal stakeholders.
If you change the law to make it more difficult, the buck stops with the government in the first place.
David Crisafulli says if elected, the Children's Court would reopen. Talissa Saganto, ABC News, Brisbane.
The parents of a 2-year-old girl have been charged with her murder after her death in December 2022. Adam and Jessica Hanbury were arrested and charged in Mackay today. Their daughter, Diana Jane Hanbury, was taken to the base hospital but had allegedly already died. Police say the child had been sick for some time, and when she got to hospital, it was too late. The couple is expected to appear in the Magistrates' Court tomorrow.
Police will be alleging that the 2-year-old victim child in this instance was denied medical intervention from the parents, subsequently causing the death of that child.
The former chair of the ACCC says Australians are being overcharged because of a lack of competition. In a blistering 80-page report into price gouging, Professor Alan Fels took aim at some of Australia's biggest companies, including banks, supermarkets and airlines.
2 for 5 strawberries.
The public outrage is loud and clear.
The big corporations are taking us to the cleaners. It's over for the little fella. It's over.
And now there is higher calls for change.
The Australian government needs to act. Australians are paying prices that are too high too often. And the cause is weak and ineffective competition.
Professor Fell's report into price gouging is scathing. Its targets include energy retailer AGL, the major supermarkets and Qantas.
They have squandered some of their good name as a national champion.
The founding chair of the ACCC wants to make it an offence to charge excessive prices, a review of the electricity sector's wholesale market, and tougher laws that allow big business to be broken up if they've abused their market power.
Business pricing has contributed significantly to inflation.
The union that commissioned Fell's report is also agitating for change, while big business is claiming bias.
We are extremely sceptical about the report that Professor Fells has produced. I think it's ironic to hold an inquiry like this and to find that it comes out with recommendations for at least another 13 reviews or inquiries.
The Fells report isn't binding, but it does come as the government conducts its own inquiries into merger laws and supermarket pricing. Professor Fells says the vulnerable are paying the price for rising inflation. Charities are being inundated by needy people who can't afford the rising cost of living, like pensioner Peter Richards.
We all matter. It's not just bucks and profit. So you just look at us little people.
Rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I'm just hoping that big businesses and others can understand the desperate need.
A reminder that profit pushing has a price. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
Well, despite the rising cost of essentials, Queenslanders are gambling more than ever. And a new report has branded the state government's efforts to reduce gambling harm as inadequate. The Queensland Audit Office has laid bare the size of the problem. Let's take a look. Queenslanders lost $6.1 billion in the last financial year. That's up 36% on 2018. The more we gamble, the more money the state government pockets in tax revenue. And last year it raked in $1.9 billion. That is a 43% increase since 2018. But across that time, the amount of money going to harm reduction programs has barely budged at just under $12 million, a tiny fraction of the revenue it receives. And it's this disparity that the Audit Office and Gambling Help Services are calling out.
Our services are busier than they've ever been and people are ringing us in crisis. So without investment, we're going to continue to see families in crisis and we're going to see the impact of gambling harm in an unacceptable way in our communities.
Pokies are by far the biggest money pit, bigger than casinos, lotteries, sports betting and Keno combined. The Justice Department leads the government's response to gambling harm, which includes things like brochures you might pick up at the GP, counselling and awareness campaigns. But here's the catch. The Audit Office says the department doesn't know if its strategies are effective because it has no robust ways to measure them. And much of the focus is on treating people already experiencing harm rather than preventing problem gambling in the first place.
We'll look at the Queensland Audit Office report and we'll consider that carefully, and if there's more we need to do out of that report, we of course will consider doing that as a government.
King Charles has been seen in public for the first time since his shock cancer diagnosis. The news triggered a flood of well wishes, as well as a reunion with his estranged son, Prince Harry.
The King spotted for the first time since announcing his cancer battle, and he was all smiles. The 75-year-old and his wife waved to onlookers outside Buckingham Palace. All eyes were on the royal reunion. Prince Harry landed in London after learning of his dad's diagnosis, the Duke of Sussex arriving at his father's residence alone and leaving less than an hour later. It's the first time the pair is believed to have met since the coronation in May, but it's understood he has no plans to see his brother, Prince William.
This whole family feud seems a bit silly in my opinion. They should make up and hopefully this brings them together a little bit more.
Many families have grim diagnoses of horrible diseases and what tends to happen is that you park the minor grievances and get on with the big stuff. So I think he'd be delighted that he's got both of his sons back on home soil.
Other royals were stepping up.
Your Royal Highness, how is the King?
Princess Anne attending multiple public events in England. While well-wishers poured in from around the world, the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reassured the public he's in regular contact with the King and revealed he caught his cancer in the early stages.
Obviously, like everyone else, shocked and sad, and just all our thoughts are with him and his family. And, thankfully, this has been caught early.
There's been no further updates from the palace on the King's health, and it's expected that from this point forward, many details of his treatment and recovery will be kept private. Charles and Camilla left London for their Sandringham estate in the countryside, where the King can get peace and privacy between treatments. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, London.
A ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war could be a step closer, with Hamas militants said to be positive about a new framework for a truce. While details of the deal have not been publicly released, the US is sceptical it'll be accepted by Israel.
A glimmer of hope after 4 gruelling months. Hamas militants react to a proposal to once again pause fighting in the Gaza Strip.
The response includes some comments on the framework, but in its entirety, it is a positive response.
While those involved are not saying much, US President Joe Biden says the demands are being considered.
It seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
The deal, put together by Israel, the US, Qatar and Egypt, is believed to include a 6-week truce and another exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners. It can't come any sooner for Israelis being held captive by Hamas. The IDF has confirmed that 136 hostages remain, with fears that as many as 31 are dead.
The proposal for a ceasefire was sent to Hamas a week ago. It's believed to include a demand that Israel releases thousands of Palestinian prisoners in return for the hostages, a demand that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has previously ruled out.
In Jerusalem, protesters picket the office of the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Israel alleges UNRWA workers were involved in the October 7 attacks. The UN has launched an internal and external investigation. But a probe by Britain's Channel 4 has found no evidence of the claims that led to a tranche of countries, including Australia, withdrawing funds.
What we need to see from UNRWA now is transparent leadership in respect of their activities.
In Rafah, Israel is ramping up its assault. Gaza's southernmost city is home to hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Desperately hoping an end to this conflict is finally in sight. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
A Gold Coast mother accused of killing her son with a poisoned fruit smoothie has walked free after her Brisbane murder trial was aborted. The prosecution alleged Marie Mavis Crabtree gave her 26-year-old son Jonathan Crabtree a lethal overdose of prescription drugs at their home in 2017. The now 57-year-old pleaded not guilty to murder. Justice Peter Davis dismissed the jury yesterday, saying new evidence had come to light. He criticised the prosecution's key witness, Ms Crabtree's daughter, Tara, saying she had motive to lie and had given inconsistent versions of events. Ms Crabtree was granted bail today on strict conditions. Workers could soon be given the right to disconnect from the office and ignore phone calls and emails after hours. The federal parliament appears set to pass new laws granting a right to switch off as part of a broader package of industrial relations reforms.
It's a phone call that can ruin a weekend.
Hello?
And soon, workers will have the right to simply ignore it.
Millions of Australian workers give their time unpaid through their phone or their computer on weekends and outside their paid working time.
Federal Parliament looks set to pass new laws creating a right to disconnect.
What we're simply saying is that someone who's not being paid 24 hours a day shouldn't be penalised if they're not online and available 24 hours a day.
It means that you have the right to refuse to be contacted where it is unreasonable in relation to your work outside your working time.
The new laws will be fairly simple. Employers will still have the right to contact their staff out of work hours, be it via email, text or phone. But workers will have the right to simply ignore it and can't be punished for doing so. The rules recognise there can be good reasons for employers getting in touch, like shift changes or work emergencies. When disputes happen, they will ultimately be decided by the Fair Work Commission.
I think this is really, a triumph of stupidity over common sense.
Business groups and the opposition warn the rules could threaten flexibility in the workplace.
If we're genuine
about flexible workplaces, if we're genuine about allowing people to take time off to go and pick up their kids from school, for instance, well then I think we've got to have sensible conversations about what rights and obligations exist.
This wasn't the government's idea. It's something the Greens negotiated into a broader IR package. It includes things like changing the way casual work is defined to better reflect a worker's actual shift patterns and setting minimum standards for gig workers, like a base rate of pay for Uber drivers and food delivery riders. Those are bigger government priorities, but a right to disconnect is something it was happy to add on. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
A warning for die-hard Taylor Swift fans. Ticket scams for the pop star's upcoming Melbourne shows are running rampant. Police say they've received at least 250 reports of ticketing scams linked to the concerts since July last year. People who've been caught up in them have mostly been targeted through social media and have lost more than $260,000. In a bid to prevent a practice known as Taylorgating, the MCG is urging superfans who didn't manage to get tickets to steer clear of the venue on all 3 concert nights.
Arrangements are being put in place to ensure that for people who are going to the concert can move in and out of the MCG in a safe way, but also too for those who may be around the venue to ensure that that is managed in an appropriately safe way.
A US appeals court has found Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity in a landmark legal case in New York. The ruling means Mr. Trump can be prosecuted on charges of plotting to overturn his 2020 election defeat. Mr. Trump had claimed he was immune from charges for acts he said fell within his duties as president. It brings him a step closer to a criminal trial. After 11 hours of deliberations, the mother of an American teenager who shot dead 4 of his classmates has been found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors in the first-of-its-kind trial argued she and her husband failed to prevent the shooting by giving their son a gun and ignoring warning signs.
A mother found guilty 2 years after her child's violent crimes. Jennifer Crumbly was convicted of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 1 for every student shot dead by her son.
It was a long time coming, but it's definitely a step toward the accountability like what we've been talking about. It's kind of been our goal the whole time.
Ethan Crumbly has already been sentenced to life in prison for killing his classmates when he was 15 years old. Prosecutors alleged he'd received the gun as a Christmas present from his parents. But when they were called to the school hours before the shooting to discuss a violent drawing he'd done, they didn't take him home or reveal that he'd been given a weapon.
There's a lot of stuff that could have easily thwarted this whole thing. It could have been stopped very easily.
This case is believed to be the first time that a parent in the US has been convicted of such serious offences over a mass shooting carried out by their child. And while gun control advocates hope it sends a warning to other parents, there's also some concern about the precedent it could set.
I understand why a prosecutor would want to try it. I mean, you know, I have children too, and it's terrifying when we drop them off to school. We think they're safe. On the other hand, there's this kind of moral intuition that at some point you can't be responsible for somebody else's behaviour.
Ethan Crumbly's father, James Crumbly, is facing the same involuntary manslaughter charges and will go to trial next month. Jade McMillan, ABC News.
Investigators say a door that flew off a Boeing 737 MAX shortly after takeoff last month was missing 4 key bolts. The US Transportation Safety Board says the bolts, which are meant to lock the unused door to the fuselage, appeared to be missing. The preliminary findings provide the first official look into what happened after the Alaska Airlines flight took off. The plane made an emergency landing and all 177 people on board escaped with no major injuries. The Federal Aviation Administration says it will hold Boeing accountable.
We've begun an audit of Boeing's production and quality control practices, and we've informed Boeing that the FAA will not grant any production expansion of the MAX until we're satisfied the quality control issues uncovered during this process are resolved.
Governments across Australia are failing Indigenous communities with their Closing the Gap policies by taking a business as usual approach. The Productivity Commission is calling on governments to relinquish power and share it with Indigenous-run organisations.
Across health, education and housing, Aboriginal-run organisations are delivering services every day under the Closing the Gap agreement. Now a damning report is criticising government for not keeping its end of the deal.
The majority of funding relating to services for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people actually doesn't go to the community-controlled sector. It goes to the NGO sector, which is not us.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations have told the Productivity Commission review of the National Agreement on Closing the Gap it's not working.
The intention was that governments would work with the Aboriginal community-controlled sector, acknowledging that they were underfunded compared to their non-Indigenous counterparts, and that has not yet happened across the entire agreement.
Closing the Gap is 15 years old. But in 2020, governments signed up to a radical overhaul, promising to share power with Indigenous-run organisations. Today's report says governments are unwilling to relinquish control and aren't revealing where and what it's spending money on.
What we need to do is hold Indigenous organisations responsible for the money that the taxpayer is giving them and stop turning a blind eye to make sure that money is being well spent.
Aboriginal community-controlled organisations are already audited. There are really, really strong controls in place.
The Productivity Commission spent 3 years looking into the effectiveness of the 2020 agreement. What was prevalent in the submissions was tension over money.
Yes, we did see examples where funding was given to external bodies outside of the Aboriginal community-controlled sector.
A message noted by the nation's leader.
We'll continue to put forward practical measures in order to close the gap, and we'll be making our statements when the Closing the Gap report is tabled shortly.
Carly Williams, ABC News.
To Finance Now, here's Alan Kohler.
Well, Woodside and Santos both said that they decided to end the merger discussions, but the fact that Santos shares fell 5.8% and Woodside went up suggests that Woodside is the dumper and Santos the dumpee. Elsewhere, the online fashion retailer Satir delivered a pretty good result and the shares jumped 25%. And NAB appointed a new CEO, Andrew Irvine, who's been running NAB's business bank for 3.5 years, having been hired from the Bank of Montreal. He takes over in April from Ross McEwen, who came from the Royal Bank of Scotland 4 years ago. Now, here's a chart of the Big Four bank share prices rebased to December 2019 when Ross McEwen took over. There was a moment 2 years ago when NAB snuck ahead of Commonwealth, but normal service has since been restored, with NAB in second place. Global markets mostly rose last night and today. Small moves all round on commodity markets. Gold, copper and oil up, iron ore down. And the Australian dollar snuck up a few points to 65.3 US cents. Now, there's a lot of focus at the moment on China's economic slowdown, but it's actually following a well-worn path. When Japan's and Korea's per capita GDP reached $7,000 US, their economic growth maxed out and started to decline. China is doing the same thing at the same rate. But China is not following Japan as a destination for Australian exports. It is buying twice as much as a percentage of Australian GDP as Japan did in the 70s and 80s. In fact, China is as important to the Australian economy now as Britain was in the early 20th century. And that's finance.
Coming up on 7:30, Sarah Ferguson sits down with opposition leader Peter Dutton.
Was it humiliating for you to have to stand up and support Labor's changes to the tax cuts?
Well, Sarah, we stood up for people that we want to see given assistance, and it's $15 a week. It doesn't start until July, and it addresses some of the damage that Labor's done to the economy.
Australia's in trouble, losing 4 early wickets in their second one-day international against South Africa in Sydney, with another excellent performance from Marizanne Cup, helping South Africa build a solid total. Rain stopped play several times and reduced the game to 45 overs each after Australia won the toss and elected to bowl. Laura Folvaert lasted 3 balls before the Proteas' middle order steadied the innings. Cup made her 3rd straight half-century as South Africa set Australia a DLS revised total of 234 for victory. Former Australian captain Ricky Ponting says he's taken a coaching role in the T20 Major Cricket League so he can be a part of the sport's growth in the United States. Ponting has been appointed coach of the Washington Freedom for the 2nd edition of the competition. The league will follow the Men's T20 World Cup, which will be held in the US and the Caribbean. A-League record goal scorer Michelle Heyman has been selected in the Matildas squad for a crucial Olympic qualifier to replace Sam Kerr. Heyman comes into the Matildas squad for 2 games against Uzbekistan at the end of the month, which the Matildas need to win to secure an Olympic berth. The 36-year-old Canberra United striker has scored 10 goals this season to become the first woman in the A-League to score 100 goals. Heyman hasn't played for the Matildas for 6 years, during which she took a year out of the game for mental health reasons.
I feel like I'm 21 again. It's a great feeling. It's been 6 years since I've put on the green and gold and represented my country. And for myself to get this call up was just, it's changed my life.
2 fishermen have had a rare close encounter with a whale shark off Queensland's east coast. Thomas D'Amelio was fishing with a friend in waters near Gari when the curious creature swam right up to his boat. The ocean's largest fish are most often seen off Western Australia, but are occasionally spotted in the east. The whale shark swam a couple of laps around the boat, giving the fishermen enough time to snap a few pictures of the once-in-a-lifetime encounter. Weather now with Jenny Woodward. And Jenny, what pictures do you have for us tonight?
Well, I have an excellent selection, Jess. Hello, everyone. First up from Bly on the Sunshine Coast. Now, Phil tells me he was glad that the dog nagged him for an early walk as he got to see this spectacular display. While yesterday, Peter caught this perfect rainbow in Richmond early in the morning. Heidi got the drone out after some welcome rain at her place at Muckadilla. And at sunset last night, Susie caught the colour run hijinks with the students from the Longreach School of Distance Education. Well, on to weather now. And overnight storms brought some heavy rain to central Queensland. Surbiton Station had 100 millimetres, Van Dyke Station 136 and Sardine Creek 126. And today storms continued with plenty of showers along the coastal fringe too, especially just north of Brisbane. Southeasterly winds in the southwest kept the temperatures down, only 33 in Birdsville today, the same as Gladstone and Harvey and Bundaberg, that is. Blackall was the hottest on 39. Now, just very light showers about the city, and it was a warm night, 25 the minimum, and then we had tops of 30 to 31 right across the metropolitan area. Onto the satellite, and showers and storms developed on the trough line over the interior, and we've had widespread activity over northern Australia. Now, the low in the Coral Sea hasn't moved much today, but it should head east tomorrow, so while there's still a good chance it will develop into a cyclone, it's not expected to have any impact for us. Most of the capitals will be fine tomorrow, but skies will be cloudy in Sydney, 25 expected there. Canberra is expecting a top of 24, along with Melbourne and Hobart, 29 for Adelaide. Onto the chart, and showers and storms are going to be focused about the inland trough, which is retreating west. Now, most of the activity is going to be on the Western Peninsula and through the Gulf region, and we will have some isolated activity further south. Also, showers building up along the coastal fringe, and winds will be picking up too. And on Friday, we can expect king tides, so there's the potential for coastal inundation in the usual places. And the flood warnings continue with major floods marked in red. That's the Boulogne, and then we've got the Nicholson and the Flinders to the north. Now to forecast, showers and storms right across northern districts, 35 the top for Normanton and Mount Isa. Inland, we've got showers and storms in a line from about Longreach to Charleville and down to the border, but fine and mostly sunny otherwise. Cloud about the southeast with showers more likely on the coastal fringe, 31 for Gympie. The The city's heading for 30 degrees. There's a high chance of showers earlier in the day and it'll be windy. And on the bay, a strong wind warning, southeasterlies to 30 knots. Looking ahead, showers expected for the rest of the week with the winds picking up. And Jess, summer still has a way to go. We've got temperatures of 29 to 31 degrees.
That's not too bad.
No.
Thanks, Jenny. That is ABC News to the moment. Thank you for your company. We'll keep you up to date on our website. But now it's time for 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson. Good night.
Good night.